So you sent me a article through Twitter that was written by Judge Napolitano about immigration.
Right.
And the judge, and I read most of it, and I've known of the judge's position on this somehow that human beings have this innate God-given right to travel wherever they want to go. My only concern about this whole thing is that while that sounds great and that's a nice kind of unicorny view of looking at everything, societies though sometimes the burden, first of all, on a society is hardcore. You look at the Bertolt Brecht has this great parable called The Good Woman of Sichuan, and she wanted to be this good Samaritan. She took these people into her house, and they kept coming, Finally, they ate her out of house and home. They destroyed her furniture and everything else.
Absolutely.
And so this good Samaritan woman lost the ability to help anyone. She wanted to help somebody, but then help him so much that she couldn't help anyone. And you look at, like, for instance, Venezuela, where the burden of that government now of socialism has destroyed.
And they're trying to get out, and they can't get out because Venezuela is closing the borders from people trying to leave. Sometimes I wonder, if you're thinking about the wall, if there was like a nuclear attack in Texas, if Americans wanted to flee south, there would be something obstructing them from going, right? So it does, walls to keep people out can also be used to keep people in.
Well, also, it's, to me, though, the illegal immigration is more than just a burden on our society. It also seems to be inhumane on its face, because you're encouraging a subculture of people who don't have any ties to this country except maybe a paycheck, who certainly can't even call the police if they are attacked or taken advantage of for fear of being deported. What kind of life is that?
I'm sympathetic to these arguments, and I always have an open mind. Spending time with the judge, he naturally had an impact on my belief on this. But of course, he was always looking at the Constitution and the guide to the founding fathers gave us. But the concept of an illegal immigrant is less than 100 years old in the United States. So there's a difference between naturalization and immigration. Naturalization is how you become an American citizen. Immigration is how you get here. And it wasn't until the late 1800s that the United States started writing laws about how you can or cannot get here. I think the very first immigration law, was the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? So we had the fear, of course, of the Chinese coming. Did you know that the reason why we have so many Chinese restaurants around the world is the only reason around the United States is because the only reason they could stay here is if they owned a business. So we have Chinese restaurants all across the United States because the Chinese immigrants had an exception. If they owned a business, they could stay here.
Wow.
So they could be excluded from the Chinese Exclusion Act. And of course, we wanted to stop the Italians, and we needed to stop the Irish as well, because of the know-nothings during Abraham Lincoln's time were worried about the Catholic influence. Right. So, but then I think about, one of my opponents, if we had stopped those Italian immigrants, I'd have one less opponent in this race. He's trying to take my job,
Tony Minetti.
That damn immigrant is trying to take my job. That was meant for an American citizen, born in Missouri. The only candidate I'm running here is born in Missouri, who's educated here. But anyways, that kind of attitude and sentiment doesn't fly with most people, right? Because there are a lot of people who don't like what I just said, talking about Chinese exclusion and Italian exclusion. Of course, Anne Frank, who tried to immigrate to the United States as an asylum seeker. She died, persecuted by the Nazis. But she tried to come to the United States. But we had quotas. Of course, FDR didn't want too many Jews fleeing from Europe into the United States. I think if we allowed churches to step up and do what they did during World War II, which was to sponsor asylum seekers rather than have the United States pay the price of the welfare burden, I think that the church has plenty of money that they would like to offer to asylum seekers. Again, if we had a smaller government, if we didn't have the federal government in charge of immigration, not naturalization, immigration, like the founding fathers had originally intended, then the churches would step up, and I think it would be less of a crisis. But the problem on the southern border won't be solved until we solve the problem of the welfare state, which is the incentive, some people coming here for the wrong reasons, and it won't be solved until we end the federal war on drugs, which is funneling billions of dollars south and pushing millions of people north. And so, of course, the underlying problem always comes back to big government and the federal government's intervention into the marketplaces, which creates distortions, which creates negative effects. Europe, they don't run on the same kind of welfare model. We're talking about you get a free house if you go to Sweden, right? That's a massive incentive, which is why their problem is even bigger than ours in the United States. But the men in the late 1800s who started writing the immigration law in the United States were flawed. They were fallible. It wasn't Thomas Jefferson. It wasn't Alexander Hamilton writing immigration law. We're talking about the radical Republicans and the Reconstructionists. And so that at that period of time, when we started going up through the progressive era, our immigration law got worse and worse and worse because, again, it was focused on excluding Chinese and Italians and Irish. And so now, in order for us to make a broader, sort of anti-illegal immigrant laws, we've subverted due process. We've abandoned constitutional rights, basic due process for people who come to the United States. If you're an American citizen, if there's no due process, which Josh Hawley wouldn't admit that people have due process. Say you lose your ID on a bender down at, hanging out doing, tequila shots in Mexico, and you come back and you don't have your ID and you want to get back into the country. Can you be deported? Because you don't have an ID, and there's no due process, well, we just send you right back to Mexico. Well, wait a minute, I'm an American and I have rights. More than that, I'm an individual who has intrinsic natural rights. Should I be able to challenge this in the court? Yeah, of course, and then they can verify my identity. Now, if you come here to commit acts of terrorism or to spread disease, or you're a security risk or a gang member, yeah, you need to be arrested and you need to be deported, right? Just because you're not for a massive FDR-style public works program on the southern border, that does not mean that you're for open borders. So the question is, taken to its two extremes. Let's look at the immigration argument from its two extremes. In my mind, a massive border wall won't really cut it. If you really see it as an invasion and a sincere danger and the threat that's being hyped, in my opinion, then you need to send the tanks and the troops and the army and the military, and you need mines and you need snipers and you need a real Berlin Wall situation on the southern border. And I wonder how many people who are for the wall are really ready to take it up to that level of rhetoric that is being espoused. And on the opposite sense, if you're for a complete open borders, well, you are for the concept of no nation state. I do believe in America as a nation state and as a culture, and that we have the right to protect our borders. But I just want to protect our civil liberties. I want to ensure we're not unnecessarily adding to the debt. And I want to make sure that whatever proposals come out respect private property rights of people who own land on the border, because 2/3 of it is owned by private landowners or the states. It could take as many as 20 years for us to acquire that land, and by that time, Trump, of course, won't be the president of the United States because of term limits. I'm the only honest man in this race who's willing to tell people what I think they probably don't want to hear, which is why I should be your next senator, because I tell it like it is, and I'm willing to question some things that seem like orthodoxy, when in reality I've been adhering to conservative principles the entire time.
But let's put it this way, though. You look at a place like Ellis Island, and there was also a Ellis Island Light down in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And so that was a process that people went through. I mean, and there were standards that the country had. I mean, if you came in here with pneumonia, you were back on the boat.
You had to go home.
So how would that apply to your view of, like, for instance,
similarly? Similarly. So, a processing center on the southern border would be a draw, a magnet, knowing that you are not a criminal, knowing that you are not here to commit acts of terrorism or crime, or that you don't have an infectious disease. What a powerful magnet that would be for people to go through that screening process, and then perhaps they wouldn't have to be separated from their families, right? And maybe there would be DNA testing on the spot to determine, is that child that you brought in your child? Okay, well, we can find that out in 6 hours or less. Just give us a little bit of saliva sample. Boom, we know that you're not sick. That is your child according to DNA evidence. And maybe they want a work visa. Well, you can get a work visa. And now you're paying taxes. You're part of the legitimate system. You can speak English. You can contribute to the economy. But if you can't prove those factors, yeah, you do have to go home. I'm not for open borders. I do think that people who want to come here who are sick or who want to commit acts of terrorism or fear or who can't identify themselves, they do have to go home. I just simply think that the rhetoric, unfortunately, is just polarized, and we can't have an honest conversation about this anymore without it getting emotional. We have snowflakes on the right too.
But you know what? But here's the thing, though. With we already have processing centers here, and they're essentially all over the place where you can come and become an American citizen, which is what.
But it takes like 10 to 15 to 25 years.
Right. So I'm wondering whether or not we, at least when it comes to, you said adjustments to be made, maybe we ought to be able to trim down the time it takes to become a citizen.
That's it.
And because, but we have a process now, and I'm not quite sure whether even if we had it only took a year, whether we'd have some people actually be willing to
that
go
would
through
be huge. But here's the thing, Jamie. Now let's be intellectually honest here. Some people, I think, are advocating for less legal immigration. Okay, if they want the overall number of people coming to the United States lowered. The problem with that is if you want less legal immigration, you're going to get more illegal immigration. So the problem is you have to fix the system that we have, which is broken, meaning that it has to become easier for people to come through legally. Otherwise, you're going to have that unintended consequence of illegal immigration. So everybody wants fewer illegal immigrants. I want no illegal immigrants here in the United States.
Right.
I want legal immigrants in the United States.
Yeah.
So that means fixing the broken system that we have. I think that's reasonable. I think that's in line with our principles. I don't think handing out benefits to people who come here to the United States right away is the way to go. But again, unfortunately, I don't think we can have reasonable conversation about this topic. It's so supercharged and it's become so politicized. And again, I'm just a little flabbergasted that it's that people have taken my views so out of context on this. If you're not this, you're that, right? It's black or white thinking. That's the problem. If you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. Right. Remember that mindset and attitude? I believe in the United States. I believe in our Constitution. I believe in having secure borders, but not at the expense of our civil liberties and not at the expense of taking people's property through eminent domain and going through this massive redistribution of wealth. Because, listen, FDR and the Democrats, they ought to love this project because of all of the taxes that it'll involve and the unions that'll be used to build it, maybe some migrant laborers.
Right. Well, and also keep in mind, we're in this situation because not because it only Democrats. We're in this situation because of Republicans too. During the Bush administration, their crackdowns on employers who hired illegal aliens was shameful. They hardly ever did. In fact, Clinton dwarfed the numbers of the Bush administration in cracking down on employers.
Obama was the deporter in chief.
Yes,
he was doing these things, and all of a sudden it's a problem. You know why? It's an election year.
Yeah.
And so the Democrats are just looking to go out there and try and demonize the Republicans. It's probably why I'm the strongest Republican against Claire, by the way, is because I'm not out there playing the demonization game. As politicians, I've learned the lessons. I know what I should be doing is finding a group of people who have no power, demonizing them, telling the American people that they are the problem, they are the ones who are harming you. I will protect you from these people. And they can't, of course, fight back because they have no power.
Right.
But this is how people like Lyndon Johnson, remember, took power, right? This is how he got the African Americans to come in the Democratic Party, was because he demonized certain groups of people and he said, I will save you from these people, so come and vote for me. Let's not adopt the topic of the Democrats, right? Let's continue to be constitutional conservatives. It doesn't mean that we have to lose American values, but we have to stick to our principles, even when it's unpopular to do so.